Haven Community Television. The following program is brought to you through the support of the Town of North Haven.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the December 21st Board of Finance meeting. So thank you all for coming. We have our agenda. Before we get into it, I'd like to offer a motion to amend tonight's agenda so that we might discuss if necessary and then vote on the November minutes. That would be the October minutes, sorry. Right, the October.
That's a motion, I'll second it.
Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. All right, so why don't we deal with the October minutes? Any questions or comments on the October minutes?
I just have one comment, and I'd like to be able to give Mr. Frieda the opportunity to actually change the language here. In the minutes on page 2, under new business, the language reads, Mr. Frieda announced that the town of North Haven has been rated AAA status by the bonding company. I have no problem with that. But the second statement, the bond company stressed to Mr. Frieda 2 areas of concern was not raising adequate taxes and growing the fund balance from 8% to 12%. So given the fact that I don't think we had any bounce checks last year, I would imagine Mr. Frieda would like to slightly amend that language that we did not raise adequate taxes.
So actually, the first thing is it's not a bonding company, okay? That's got to change. It's by
Right.
the rating agency.
Rating agency,
Right.
exactly.
All right. And the rating agency stressed to Mr. Frieda 2 areas of concern. And Tammy, I'm going to have you do this, okay? One was not raising taxes in the past several years, and the other was the need for growing the fund balance from 8% to 12%.
And by raising taxes, you mean increasing the mill rate?
Right.
Because taxes could go up even though the mill rate stays the same.
In a reval year, that would happen, but these weren't, last year was not a reval year.
I think the problem there is the word adequate. I can see why they're concerned that we're not raising taxes, the tax rate, because they want to see that our municipality has the capability of supporting higher expenses in the future. So even though we may disagree with that as a policy and as something that we're concerned with, I think the word adequate is
Well, the word adequate was never mentioned, so that might just be in the translations.
So, thank you for clarifying, I appreciate it.
All right, so,
Would you like to amend and make those 2 changes?
yes, we need a motion.
A motion to change bond company to rating agency and to delete the word adequate from that paragraph.
I'll second. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All right, thank you all. All right,
In that case, I'd like to make a motion to accept these minutes.
I thought we just did
Have
that.
we did that?
Yeah.
Have we done that? No, we amended minutes.
Okay.
Now we have to pass them.
Yes.
All right,
Yeah, I'll do that.
I'll second your motion.
Yep.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you. Guess I'm getting there. It's only been a couple months.
You never take a month off.
Truly. All right, so under old business tonight, we have a proposed memorandum of agreement between the Board of Finance and the Board of Ed concerning the unexpended education fund account, also known as the Fund 373 Unexpended Prior Year Fund. We've talked about this in 1 or 2 prior meetings. We do have the MOU in our package. There was a second MOU which was on your desk, which I'll get to in just 1 minute. But just as a reminder, we did talk to our town council, Jeff D'Onofrio, And he's opined that we can create this fund for expended prior year funds. It's not necessary to do that for the special education fund, since that's already a line item in the Board of Education budget. There is a capital fund which does exist, known as Fund 423. The intention would be, once the MOU is agreed upon by both the Board of Ed and the Board of Finance and signed, they would, and I mean the Board of Ed, they would move any unexpended funds in the capital fund over to the Fund 373, the unexpended prior year funds, because it's been discussed and determined that there's no reason to have two separate funds. And the funds are available for educational purposes. The Board of Ed would decide what those expenditure purposes would be, and they could decide them to be capital or operating. And so really only one fund is necessary. So before I open it up to discussion, I'd like to point one thing out, and then if you don't mind, I'll give Mike the floor for a second in case he wants to add anything, and then we'll take some questions. But I would just point out, you've got a revised agreement which you received this evening. The only change is, if you look at the paragraph number 1 and the last sentence, this is a recommended change which came after you were mailed your packages, and it comes from the Board of Ed. You know, they like the last sentence to read, and I'll just read it out for those of you who are in the audience and at home. The Board of Finance may deny any request from the Board of Ed, or may approve such requests with any reductions as the Board of Finance deems appropriate. And they'd like to have that in lieu of the other sentence, which I will also read for those who are at home. The current draft, which was in your packages, reads, the Board of Finance may deny any request from the Board of Ed, or may approve such requests with modifications, amendments, reductions, or such reasonable conditions as the Board of Finance deems appropriate. I'm going to turn over to Mike for just 1 second, because I think he has probably a little background, which is important in this change.
Yes, and I support this change because on a larger scale, there's a major issue happening with the Amity School District right now. And there's potential litigation between the Board of Ed and the 3 towns for the Board of Finances overstepping their authority, and the towns wanting the money back in the general fund. So I support this. And by the way, I have talked to all the different mayors and first selectmen about this involved, so I know a lot about this potential case. So I support this language because this language may open us up to interpretation that perhaps this Board of Finance didn't intend to happen. So by eliminating those words and keeping the last sentence in place with what Tim mentioned, it sort of insulates us to a certain extent. It shows the Board of Ed that, because they're working very well with us on this, they're not debating this MOU. They fully support it. But I don't want to make it more complicated than it is, knowing what's happening firsthand in this region. That's why I support this change.
Thank you, Mike. Any conversation questions from you?
Sure, I have several points to make regarding the actual language of the MOU, but first of all, Mr. Chairman, I think you made a statement that the special ed fund is exempt from this MOU because it is considered a line item in the Board of Ed budget. But in fact, each month we get these reports from the town, actually, and it says North Haven Public Schools Town Fund. We have Town Fund 423, we have Town Fund 389, Special Ed Reserve Reconciliation by month, and then we have the medical and dental. So the first one, I believe, is capital. So these are town funds. These are what we consider special accounts, much like MRSA and several other funds that we record, and I deem these to be extra budgetary. So they are not part of either the town's budget or the Board of Education budget. So I think the notion that surpluses at the end of the year can be transferred into any one of these 3 special accounts, which are town regulated and printed out by our finance department, I believe have to be covered. by this MOU, first and foremost?
The attorneys feel differently. The only jurisdiction we have is on capital. We've gone through this time and time again with the attorneys. And the attorney, by the way, is an expert on municipal government. Having served on Board of Educations, teaches municipal law to other municipalities. So we're going to go with what the attorney says.
I don't question Mr. D'Onofrio's qualifications. I'm simply pointing out what it says at the top of the page. And each of these reports that we receive, which says North Haven Public School Town Fund. And these are printouts that we get from our town's finance office, not from the Board of Ed. And so,
I'm sorry.
so that's my first point.
Just
And,
if you wouldn't mind, for 1
sure,
second.
yes, go
I
ahead.
don't know who prints these out, and you may be right, maybe it would come from Howard, maybe it does come from our own finance department, and, you know, it says North Haven Public Schools, that's the header. It does say
Yep.
Town Fund 389, Special Reserve Reconciliation by month, and then obviously you've got the other one,
So it's capital, special ed, and then medical and dental. Those are the three.
So, I think we all recognize that the special education in this town is handled by the Board of Ed, right?
It is handled by the Board of Ed, but it is not, this particular fund is not part of the Board of Education budget.
Well, I think one of your points in the past has been that money was transferred to this, out of the Board of Ed into this fund that they established, if you will, right?
They refer to this as the rainy day funds, right, for each of these three. Now, medical and dental is a little different because that has a little bit of a revolving door of employee contributions, town contributions, money in and money out, much more frequently than the other two. But certainly capital and special ed are what they refer to as rainy day funds.
Okay. Listen, we've talked about this before, we talked about the October meeting, I apologize for repeating what Mike just said, but, you know, this was brought up, we looked into it, as we promised we would, and we got our town council that the fund could be established as we identified here, but that's not necessary for the two funds that you're referring to.
So it would be great if Mr. D'Onofrio could be here, because again, I didn't know who actually penned this particular memorandum of agreement, because, you know, there's nothing that says Jeff D'Onofrio here. But, so it would be great if Mr. D'Onofrio could have been here. I personally believe, and I have, you know, several comments about this, I think it's very important to state right up front, what is the purpose of this either memorandum of agreement or memorandum of understanding. We've gone back and forth between those two terms. I'm not a lawyer, but I believe that they mean different things. We started off with an MOU, and now it's called a memorandum of agreement. But I think it's important to state right up front, the purpose of this is to describe the process, responsibilities, timeline, and consequences of non-compliance with this particular agreement. And in terms of the actual language of the draft, I think that there are a few different points that need to be pointed out. First of all, the change that was made in terms of the ability of the Board of Finance to deny the Board of Education request for transfer of up to 2% of their budget. It does not state in this memorandum exactly what happens to that money. Now, we've known historically surpluses from the Board of Ed just simply roll over back into the general fund, but it's not stated here. So my understanding is that an agreement needs to spell out the process and then what happens with outcome A or outcome B. And it doesn't actually spell out outcome A, which is if it's denied by the Board of Finance. If it is approved by the Board of Finance, then it's very clear the Board of Ed can then make recommendations as to how that money is dispersed into these rainy day funds. But it's the first is not.
I could be wrong, but having been on this board quite a long time, I believe you're supposed to turn the money over to the general fund, as you said. Whether that's in our town charter, that's just state statute, I'm afraid I can't say for sure. But that's my understanding.
Well, the last 2 years, clearly they haven't, right?
Well, we haven't an opinion on that, but that's okay.
So that's what happened, exactly, early on. The money came back in the general fund. It was put aside before the state statute came into effect, because I'm the one that had the agreement with Bob Cronin back then. And I talked about the Common Core example. So they came in with a surplus of roughly $400,000. Common Core required the town to upgrade all the computers and technology. That, I think, was a $355,000 expense. So in effect, and I've said this 12 times here in the last several months, we did it that way, and then the state followed us by creating the statute. We did it that way, so the Board of Ed wouldn't just spend their money to spend it at the end of the year for pencils and things maybe they didn't need. The agreement was, you come in with a surplus, it goes back to the general fund, but we're going to give it to you back when you need a capital request or a capital expense, so that capital expense doesn't appear in next year's budget, thereby saving the taxpayers' money.
So first of all, this particular legislation has been on the books since 2010. It was updated in 2019 and again in 2021. And what you're describing is a very informal process. And so we decided back in August of 2020 as a board to formalize the process to be in compliance with this particular legislation. So we all agreed that we would create this non-lapsing fund called the Board of Ed Carryover Fund. And in that particular year, we did actually transfer their surplus into their capital fund. However, for the last 2 years, even though we had this process in place, the process was not followed. So that is, I believe, the reason that we need this memorandum of agreement or understanding in place to ensure that the process is spelled out and that we are in fact in compliance with the law, which we have not been in compliance with for the last 2 years. So if I could return to my comments. Okay, so the first point was what happens to the money if denied by the Board of Finance. My second point is in provision number 2, it's grammatically incorrect in that there's a tense problem. If you read it carefully, the Board of Ed will provide a list to the Board of Finance on items approved, that's the past tense, by the Board of Ed on a monthly basis related to dollars expended from funds deposited into Fund 373 for educational purposes. The Board of Ed's written list to the Board of Finance shall specify the proposed use, again, that is future tense. So it's not clear from this particular language, are they asking for our blessings, or are they informing us after the fact, after the money is already spent? That is not clear from this particular language. And also, who approves and by what timeline? Again, I think a memorandum of understanding needs to spell out who does what, by what time frame, and with what level of accountability.
My understanding of our conversation with the Board of Ed was that we would get a list of the items that were approved, so after the fact, there may be a tense problem here, as you say, but that's my understanding. And as far as how they do it, that's up to them as far as I'm concerned. The Board of Ed has their own processes, they have their own board members. It's not just to tell them how to approve the expenditures.
No, that's exactly what this memorandum of understanding does.
No, I disagree.
It absolutely spells out this process of how this money should be approved and spent.
No,
That's
it
exactly what it does.
It doesn't. What this memorandum says is that they're going to come to us and request a certain amount of dollars that they'd like to put into this fund. And we're going to say yes, no, or less. And once we do that, the Board of Ed will have the authority to spend the money as they see fit, but the only requirement being they have to report back to us, as they do now, by the way, when they've spent the money. That's what this says.
Well, the way it is written, it is not clear whether it's done in advance or after the fact. Because
That's the
again,
reporting portion, and I would say I don't disagree with you. There's a little bit of tense problem there.
yeah.
But that portion doesn't talk about how the Board of Ed makes the decisions on how to spend money. That's up to them.
Well, again, as I think we've talked about before, there is supposed to be a proposal at the end of the fiscal year as to how they intend to allocate this money into these different funds with a rough idea of how it should be spent. And then, on a monthly basis, I believe that there has to be some level of fiscal responsibility here. As Ed Swinkowski used to say, he would be the gatekeeper of this particular non-lapsing fund. And so simply telling us after the fact is not really doing that function. And as you pointed out before, it's not a question of whether we trust the Board of Education. That's not the issue at all. I believe that we allocate a certain amount of money to the Board of Ed each year. Whatever they spend, and they have absolute discretion to do that any way they want, including transfers on a monthly basis. However, with the money that is left over at the end of the year, this is the people's money. And so I think we, as a Board of Finance, have some level of responsibility as to how it is allocated and ultimately how it is spent. I'm not saying that we should usurp the Board of Education's role or autonomy or responsibility, but I'm proposing some level of collaboration here, rather than simply turning this over and saying, here's 2%, do whatever you want with it.
I guess my comment there would be, I don't think the process that you just described, I don't think the two processes you just described are really any different, okay? We approve money from the Board of Ed every year, and they spend it. Now, they give us a large budget that's very detailed, we spend a lot of time going through, and they tell us, so much for salaries, so much for this, so much for that, okay? Now, they're gonna come to us sometime in the summer, perhaps before the end of the fiscal year, perhaps up to August 31st, I think this says. And if they have unexpended prior year money, they're gonna ask us perhaps if we could please move it to the fund. I think that would be the right time for you or any other member of the board to say, okay, please tell me what you're gonna spend the money on. Okay, and that may be prerequisite for your vote, and that's your prerogative, in my opinion. But once the money's moved over, it's their right to spend it the way they see fit as approved by their Board of Ed.
Tim, it says very clearly here, any such unexpended funds, if they exist, the Board of Ed may, by August 31st, submit to the Board of Finance a written request that up to a maximum of 2% of the total appropriation, not to exceed 3% in aggregate, to the BOE for its operating budget for such fiscal year be deposited into this fund. So we're already including that, and the BOE may also submit such requests during the 2 months prior to that, the end of the fiscal year, with a good faith best estimate of the amount of its operating budget appropriation that will be unexpended at the conclusion of the fiscal year. And then, as you mentioned, this additional language that the
I
Board of
think I'm
Finance.
missing your point, unfortunately.
The point is, I think as part of this request for the 2%, should include some language about what they want to do with it, not just we want to dump
Well,
X amount in here and Y
You're
amount.
attacking on me now, okay, because that's not what you said a minute ago. What you said a minute ago was that you wanted some accountability after the fund is established for us to monitor their expenditures, and I disagreed with you. And what I said was exactly what you just repeated, which is that I think if that's the prerequisite for your vote, then that should come up when they come to this board in August and ask for the money to be moved over. And if you don't feel comfortable, and maybe we all won't, by the way, if you don't feel comfortable granting that vote without some idea of what they're gonna spend the money on, then you can take that into consideration in your vote, and we all will, by the way. Maybe none of us are gonna wanna hear from the Board of Ed that they just want 500,000 moved over without some indication what it's gonna be spent on. But
So-
that's sort of the process I see it. Once we agree to that, they have the right to vote and move the money into whatever expenditure they see fit.
So I think it would be a very simple tweak to just say, as part of this written request for up to 2%, they also provide us with a good faith estimate as to how they think this money might be spent.
I guess my thought there is, I don't know what the statute says, and maybe it's silent on that point, Nancy. Okay, and I guess the other members are somewhat quiet on this topic, but I don't think it needs to be said, because I think that's up to the Board of Ed, to decide how they want to make their request.
Does anyone else have a comment on this?
Well, I'm sympathetic to your concerns here because handing out a blank check is never something that's easy for us to do. However, the Board of Ed has pretty much the discretion to spend any amount, anything in their budget, any way they want throughout the fiscal year because of the way they can go and modify their budget and their expenditure plan throughout the year. So,
And Mike, not to interrupt you, Steve, but our own report from the Board of Ed this month mentions a small item, it's like 15 grand, I think, Nancy, which was a unbudgeted item where they added the line to the budget because they wanted to account for that, so, apologize, Mike.
yeah. I mean, we could add some words in here about just requesting a proposal of intent of use, maybe. But again, it's hard to hold them to any stricter standard than that if indeed they don't have a requirement to have us approve their budget rigidly within the fiscal year.
Well, I would point out that they could do that, right? But they wouldn't be bound to hold to that. That might not make us happy, that might not make you happy, but they wouldn't be bound to that.
Yeah, so a couple extra words might add to an idea of how a vision of what their presentation should include, rather than just asking for a lump sum of money. So again, I'm sympathetic to her concerns, and frankly, it's hard for us to make any kind of approval of use of funds unless we have some idea of what their intentions are.
I mean, if I could say something, my view on this is that we are, as a Board of Finance, we're less close to the budget and the Board of Education in understanding where dollars can be spent in the most beneficial way possible. And I feel like that the Board of Education has their own processes and they're close to where to make the greatest impact for the town and how to spend our town dollars in the most beneficial way possible. So I just don't see the added value in not having the perspective of where the funds should go. So I don't see a need for this because I fully believe that the Board of Ed is well within their means and capable to make the appropriate decisions for our town.
If I can just provide some context from Howard's memo back in October. He had said that the town has requested that we complete an MOU between the BOE and the town that in summary states that any excess funds from the BOE operating budget at year end will automatically moved to the BOE Capital Projects Fund up to 2% of the current year's operating budget. This will require approval of the BOE at the next meeting. So I believe that their expectation is that this is simply formalizing their expectation of the last 2 years in which 2% is just automatically put into one of these funds and they have carte blanche access to it to do as they wish. And I don't believe that that is exactly what the Connecticut statute 10-248A says. It's not just that we have the ability to say no. I think that we have the ability to provide some input as well.
So Nancy, can I ask you a question?
Sure, please, absolutely.
So is it that in here it says, if such unexpended funds exist, the Board of Ed may, is that kind of where you're going at? It doesn't say that they have to tell us. Is that part of what you're trying to say? Like if they have an overage, they could say they have an overage, but they're not telling us, they don't have to tell us at that point. Is that part of it, or am I totally misunderstanding what you're saying?
So again, if such unexpended funds exist, the BOE may, by August 31st,
Right.
submit to the Board of Finance a written request. So I think they should
So
submit a written
that's-
request.
okay.
And in that written request,
So
To the extent that they can,
what
provide
they,
a good faith
so,
description.
so if it said, if such unexpended funds
Must.
exist, the Board of Ed will or will submit or wills, must, whatever, if
Yeah.
that was changed, that's what you're.
A written request that also includes a good faith description
What they
of
know
how
at
they
the
want
time,
to
right,
use the
right,
money.
okay, all right.
Is that reasonable to everyone? Again, I'm not trying to force their hand into saying you can only spend
Good
it.
faith or the.
Yeah, you're
word-
just trying to
in
formalize
other words,
the
might-
good
might be
faith by,
Non-binding.
it's the word may.
Yes, may.
So, for example, Howard recommended in, I want to say April, we're going to have a surplus. He recommended that it be put into capital and special ed. And lo and behold, it went into capital and medical. Well, that's not really what they had originally intended for it to do, right?
So maybe if we change, I don't know, maybe it's a suggestion, maybe that may, we have to change the wording that they will or submit to us a written request, what they think at that time, because
Exactly.
things change.
Exactly, things
And
change.
if
but a
if
good-
that's,
good
if
faith
that is
description.
something, that would suffice to everybody who's spoken up with that little change, I don't see that as a big issue. I think the
I
may
would
is
say
what's
that-
falling,
Yeah,
is
I
the
mean,
problem.
When I read the word may,
Mhm.
I took that to mean the Board of Ed
Mhm.
can request that the money be rolled over into this fund, or if not, by the way, they'd have to kick it back to the general fund, Nancy. But I.
That should be spelled out then.
Yes, you mentioned
Both.
If it would satisfy the members that we get a good faith description of potential future uses of this, I'm happy to take that back to the Board of Ed.
Yeah, and maybe if, again, I think it's simple, if it exists, the Board of Ed will, required something, the may, I think, is the problem.
Right. Unfortunately, there's two decision notes here. The first is the Board of Ed may request that they have access to this 2%. They might not. In the case that they don't want access to this 2%, it goes into the general fund. That should be spelled out. If they do request it, again, there's another decision node. The Board of Finance may appropriate 2% or may not,
Well,
or
that's
may
it.
do something in between,
That's
right?
it, right, that's it.
Right? So that's all I'm saying, is if we say no, to no amount of money should be made available to the Board of Ed, that should be spelled out. If we say some amount between 0 and 2%, that should also be spelled out. And then
Well,
ultimately,
that is in here.
um,
Right, even the revised language says that.
up to a maximum of 2%. Yes, I agree. But the no is not spelled out. That's what I'm saying. For
Board of
either the
Finance
Board of
may
Ed
deny
or the
either
Board of
request from
Finance.
the Board of Ed, or may approve such request, any reductions as we deem appropriate.
Yes, what I'm saying is if either the Board of Ed or the Board of Finance say no, that needs to be spelled out what the consequence of those two decisions are.
Do you want to send something like, in the case of denial or reduction, the amount of the remaining surplus funds not approved would be returned to the
General fund.
general fund? Is that?
Yes, so something to that effect. And also, along these same lines, I think this is a very important point just in terms of good accounting practices, because throughout the year, we refer to these unexpended funds as surplus, but then at the end of the year, they describe a surplus that includes these transfers as expenditures. So I think it is very important that the Board of Education must declare unexpended funds as surplus, not as expenditures, and that has to be something that is very upfront and transparent. Again, that is one of my purposes of trying to move forward with this, is so that the people of North Haven can see very clearly how their money is being spent.
So-
And so I think that is something that needs to
So
be.
in the last couple of years, they saw very clearly, special ed, self-insured medical, and capital. The people saw that. The people saved money in the following fiscal year because that money was utilized, that surplus. So I'm willing to table this, but some of the things you just said, Nancy, you're putting us in dangerous territory getting into what the Amity School District is going through right now. Because if you're suggesting here that the Board of Finance could say no, and that the 2% goes back to the general fund, you're putting us in a lawsuit if this Amity Regional lawsuit goes through.
Isn't that what we did for years?
By the way, I didn't
That's what we did for
understand-
years.
I didn't understand, sorry, Mike, I did not understand your request to be what Mike just said. But I understood your request to be, was that if they made, let's say, $150,000 request next spring or next August?
Actually, my request was in August to Mr. Frieda for this last fiscal year. And Mike, I believe you agreed that we would handle this the way that we approved 2 years ago.
That's why you see this
But,
MOU.
but that's for this last fiscal year. Now the book's already closed, so
Right.
we can't do this for this last fiscal
That's
year.
right.
So this has to be going forward.
Exactly.
Just so I understand, because here's what I understood.
Yes.
It's next year, they asked for $150,000, okay? Let's say we approve it, and they don't spend any money. In the following year, if they have a new request for $300,000, we might deny that and tell them we'd like to return to the general fund. But that doesn't affect the balance in the fund, which was what I thought I heard Mike just say that a moment ago. The balance of the fund would not be returned. The only thing that
Never.
would be returned would
No,
be
no.
surplus in the 1 year that we have
That's
our.
right.
Absolutely. It's like any special fund.
Right.
The balance is
Okay,
the
I just want to
balance.
clarify. So here's the three things I got, okay? You prefer that the document said, what happens if the Board of Finance says no totally to the request, or less, I guess even, right?
Mm-hmm.
2, perhaps change the word may, but work in the idea that we'd like at least a good faith description of what the usage is, future use would be when they make their request.
The tense in
Sorry, the
item
10th, I
number 2.
apologize, that was number 3. And I'm kind of with Mike on number 4. I don't want to tell the Board of Finance how to define the Board of Ed how to define their terms. I think it's getting awful muddy when we start telling them what we think the term surplus should be defined as.
It's an accounting practice. We give them a lump sum amount of money. At the end of the year, they've spent that lump sum, some fraction of it. It might not be 100%. Whatever is left over is by definition a surplus. If they move that money but do not spend a dime of it in that fiscal year, by definition, and Howard agreed with me, that money is still surplus and needs to be reported as such.
So they
It's
can.
It's not my role here, or our role, to tell the accounting department how to run their books and records, right? We have an oversight role, right? I'm willing to table this, as Mike suggested. My first call will be to Jeff to run some of the suggested changes by him to make sure he thinks they're appropriate. And if he does, then either Mike and or I will bring this to the Board of Ed, probably starting with Howard and Patrick, to make sure that, they're okay with both changes.
Right. And I have one more comment on section number 3, which, again, I just think in Jeff's efforts to be very thorough, unfortunately, I think he did not create sentences that are very clear. The entire sentence just kind of goes round and round, but I think a better alternative would just be to say that amounts deposited into or withdrawn from Fund 373 should have no impact on future budgets, period. So whatever amount that we transfer, as you pointed out, Tim, in a given year into these, if we agree to it, to transfer, that should have no impact on the budget development process. We don't want to penalize the Board of Education in any way as a result of this memorandum of agreement.
I'll bring up my experience with lawyers can be somewhat touchy when you tell them how to word things,
Right.
but I'll bring it up with them.
So we're going to table this, as Tim said, then we're going to come back, and I'm going to tell you this. There's going to be a vote on this the next time, because we've been going on too long on this. And my concern is, I'm trying to listen to your point of view. Knowing what I know, some of the things you said tonight, just a few of them, are going to put us in the same waters, the same dangerous waters that are going on right now regionally. And I'm going to be looking very closely at that at the next Board of Finance meeting, after we come up with an amendment to this.
Right. Well, I think that having an unapproved process is even more dangerous than having an approved process that needs to be followed with some accountability for following it.
They're going to come back. What would you say if they come back? All right, the three categories are special ed, insurance, and capital.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to say no to that? You're going to vote no against that?
No, again, my request is that they come to us with a specific request for, we would like to put X, Y, and Z dollars into the following funds for the following purposes, with a best faith effort to describe how they would like to use that money. Right?
I think we just determined that, or will that, see if we can put that in
Yeah,
the
what-
document. Keeping in mind that if that occurs, and for some reason mid-year, potentially, they decide to use the money in a different way, we don't have any ability to say, sorry, you told us it was gonna be spent on whatever. So good faith is just what it sounds like in my opinion. It's not binding, it's their best effort at the time the document's submitted.
Because things could change.
Of course, things could change,
So-
but again, I'm
I think-
suggesting a collaboration here.
I think we have a direction, okay?
Okay, let's go.
All right, so I appreciate the discussion. Why don't we move on
Do you need a
to,
motion to table or not?
I don't think we do, Mike. Okay, I'm not 100% sure, but I think we need a motion to pass it because of that.
Yeah, there's no motion to made to
Right.
pass it, then.
So I think maybe if Tammy could just reflect in the minutes that there was no.
Yeah, because we say
Yeah.
possible action.
Was this voted on by the Board of Education, just for
Well,
reference?
no, because once we sign it, they have to sign it, so.
Okay, so this is the ordering, is that we would
Right.
approve it first?
But there's been Board of Education feedback on this, so, in that collaboration.
All right, why don't we move on to new business, which is our reports. Let's do the revenue first, and then we'll move on to the expenses. Ingrid is here. She is going to handle all the questions unless we give her a double jeopardy question, which we might have to ask Mike for some help.
So we're starting with October.
You can,
Or are we gonna
my
go
intention
into
was
that? Yeah,
just deal with
that's-
November reports, but,
Okay, that's what I'm clarifying, what are we looking at?
I meant November.
November? Okay.
Yeah.
Right.
So we're skipping over October altogether. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, we have the year-to-date numbers, so.
Yeah, no, I'm fine with that, I just wanted to be clear.
Why don't I start off, Ingrid, I just had one question. The arrears taxes, I see some negative numbers. Is these refunds from DOA appeals? What is that?
Oh, yeah, at the same.
It's on page one.
Page one, arrears taxes, there's negative.
Arrears taxes,
Thank you.
minus 128,786 for the month of November.
We discussed this.
Yeah, I think it's a combination of some of the BAA decisions that have caught up in November. It could be an error in some respects. We're going to check that, but I think it's a BAA issue, that there was a catch-up on some of the arrears. So,
Ingrid, maybe you could check on that.
Yes, I'll check on that.
I had a question about, down at the bottom of the page, grants for municipal projects. We're reflecting year-to-date revenue and month-to-date revenue, and we don't actually get that until June. So is this just a placeholder, or how are we doing
Ingrid,
this?
do you want to answer that, or do you want me to answer it?
You can go ahead and answer that.
Okay, so this will be the last time you're going to see this, okay?
Ah, okay.
But this is put in here just to show us what is the current expenditures against MRSA out of the streets and roads.
I see.
So you won't see any number in there in the future.
So would these same numbers be then reflected as expenditures in streets and roads?
They're already in the expenditures.
Right.
Okay, so they're in there, and this is just to show us, and next month, this will be zeroed out?
Be zeroed out.
Yes.
Got it.
Right.
Okay.
All right, I guess something happened in November, I'm sorry, in October, because looking at the revenue item for town miscellaneous receipts, we received $482,000 in October. Or, well, something was
Well,
accounted for in that line.
Ingrid, because I was involved with this, I'll handle this question, okay?
Okay.
So,
Yeah.
So when I was president of Connecticut Conference of Municipalities, we worked closely with the governor's office and OPM, and at that point in time, there was a possibility that municipalities could get an overage on the state sales tax collection. So for the last year and a half or so, we've been watching this, and we didn't budget any revenue because many cities and towns budget things that they don't know they're going to get. Well, as it turned out, through the collaborative efforts of us, the CCM and cost, we ended up getting this money, which we didn't budget for, which was part of the original discussion when I was president of Connecticut Conference of Municipalities. So we ended up getting a windfall of that amount.
Wonderful, excellent. Is that a one-time payment, or is that something that will be coming again and again?
Well, we have to treat it as a one-time payment because we don't know what the next year is going to bring. So,
Okay, all right. So a one-time payment
This year.
in October, or September, whatever. it was.
yeah, this money came in October. I think it was
Yeah.
October. So,
I mean, usually we get things toward the end of a fiscal year, not at the beginning of a fiscal year.
so we're grateful we got it this fiscal year.
Marvelous.
For the public watching, ladies and gentlemen, what this discussion is about, we ended up getting $400,000+ more than we budgeted for. And that's a plus on the revenue side.
Well, wonderful.
Any further questions on revenue? Okay. All right, before we do the expenditures, I'd like for Mike to just please give us a little recap, if you wouldn't mind, about how we're doing here today.
Yes, and then we're going to turn it over to Ingrid for the rest of the questions. But before we get started on the expenditures, when we look at the time elapsed on the expenditures and the revenue, we're roughly 50, with 46% roughly elapsed this year. We're probably at about 51% of money spent. But you got to keep this in mind. You have to keep this in mind, that about 8.3 million of these expenditures that you see in this expenditure report are front-loaded expenses that are non-reoccurring for the balance of the fiscal year. So that kind of explains why there's a discrepancy in the fact that the expenditures are exceeding by about 4 or 5 percentage points the time elapsed formula. But these will be non-recurring expenses as the year goes on, so it smooths out.
All right, thank you, Mike. With that, any questions for either Mike or Ingrid on the expense side?
Yes, Ingrid, on the building inspection permit, page
What
4,
Let's give her the page, we can't.
Yeah.
page 4 of the expense budget. I think you might have clarified this in a prior meeting, but consultants being over is that just offsetting the part-time budget that we're not spending on the prior page?
Yes, there was a part-time position that was replaced with a consultant.
Okay. Yeah, typically consultants cost a lot more than part-time help, so hopefully we're gonna,
We don't have to pay their taxes or pensions.
Yes,
That's fair.
benefits.
Benefit fund savings is huge.
What was that again that got replaced by a consultant?
The part-time person.
part-time.
the prior-
part-time person. And the only other question I had was in the IT section, just maintenance contracts. Was there several front-loaded expenses there? Or is there a reason why we're,
Maintenance.
page 7, sorry.
Yes, software maintenance contracts. Yearly fees, one-time fees, a lot of
They're
them.
more front-loaded?
Yeah, front-loaded.
Okay.
I have a couple questions on 9, police, building supplies, and then there's dues and expenses, and then the canine, so I don't know the canine, if we have more dogs, or can you explain those 3?
Funny you say that, because I saw the canine, and I recall them asking us for more money, because they said that the dog was expensive in terms of the feed and stuff, and maybe we didn't increase the budget, I don't know.
On the canine, there was an emergency visit
okay.
for a canine, and the price increase in food has also
Okay.
draw that in expenses. And what was your other
The
question?
building supplies, I mean, it's a little over, so my question is what, and is that it? Is this one of these front-loaded that accounts and then,
There was a fire pump service renewal.
okay.
There's open contracts for janitorial services in there. We have open encumbrances for supplies for Home Depot. In the security service agreement, we had a price increase of 50% this year. It's a sole source.
Sole source provider, I'm familiar with that, and then the dues and expenses.
The
What
dues
is-
and expenses.
Yeah, what exactly is that? And
It
it's
was,
over, and is this a one-time thing?
yes, it was accreditation fees for state mandate
Okay,
this year.
okay, thank you.
Great.
I had a quick question on page 5, under Finance Department. Now, when we put together this budget, obviously, we had not yet hired Ingrid and Rich, and so as a result, we had quite a pretty substantial increase in part-time help in the finance office. So, so the question is, now that we have Rich and Ingrid on board, do we feel that that particular line item will be decreasing? Because it's currently at, right on target, like 43%. So I just wondered if that was the plan.
Well, we hired some people back part-time. Ellen was one of them, right? Isn't that why we have this part-time line?
Yes, and we also, our accounts payable is on maternity leave. She has been for the last couple of months, so we need,
Right. But
that extra
this
help.
particular line item went up like 6-fold from what it was the previous year. And again, we all agreed that it made sense because we were missing not just Ed, but terribly, but also that we hadn't yet filled 2 positions. And so now that we have filled those 2 full-time positions, I guess the question is, should we expect that there should be some readjustment there?
How many who are the part-timers now, so besides Ellen?
we have Ellen, we have Marilyn, head bookkeeper, we have Lucio.
Were any of them full-time employees last year, to your knowledge?
No.
Uh,
No,
was.
Ellen retired, yeah,
Ellen.
she retired, yeah.
Right.
She retired in
And
mid-year.
this, I believe these were printed by Rose, did I see? I'm not sure. Anyway, so I just wanted to put that idea out there because, again, this was a line item that I think we all agreed to under one circumstance, and now the circumstances are.
The answer, Nancy, right now is, the answer is, we don't know, because there's a lot going on downstairs. And Ingrid's doing double duty. She's also the accounts payable person, in addition to trying to be the controller. We'll have a better handle on that in a couple of
Sure,
months.
I mean, there's steep learning curves for everyone, I totally
Yes.
understand that, but we have, a good chunk of the year ahead of us. And on that same page, under contingency fund, I'm seeing the 52,705. Is this the Public Works truck that we all
Yes,
approved?
that was approved.
But they haven't bought it yet?
We haven't paid for it yet because it's allocated in an encumbrance line.
Right, so,
Yes.
we have a bill, or we don't?
We haven't get a bill
We
for
don't
it.
have the product or the bill?
Yes,
Right.
but it's allocated.
Right, I
yes.
see, okay.
What about the medical supplies for fire on page 10? Is that related to like volume of calls that are increasing, or I know we have quite a few
Yes,
fires in town?
their supplies have substantially increased. The
I'm sure
price of
price.
them, right? The
We had
price of everything.
We had a couple of big fires down on Louise. We've had a lot of accidents from the connector. Every other week, there's an accident over there.
Yes.
But largely, it's the inflationary aspect of the
Right.
paramedic supplies.
Yeah, that's what I thought, part of it, and
Of supplies in general, everything
supplies
has
and
increased.
accidents,
Yes.
increase in fires, especially that area, exit 10, there's constantly an accident over there.
I know.
And I'm not really sure why. I think people think that they can, it continues when, and the real estate for merging is too long or something, but there's a problem over there. I always see fire engines over there. I don't know if the state could look at that, but that's a problem.
Well, the last fatality that just happened is being investigated by the state. So, in our fire department, we're out there on that tragedy.
Yeah, well, that's where one of the trucks got hit too,
Right.
when it's
Right,
trying to
we do.
block from that. So I don't know, that's a problem area for us in this town.
Ingrid, just a couple from me on page 10.
Sure.
Fire again. So, I apologize, this is exactly the same question, but the EMT was line 5140, 167,000, we basically spent the whole thing. Is that the supplies that Diane was just talking about?
I'm sorry. What was the line?
5140, 167,000, we basically fully expended the line.
I think that's when they get paid for just being EMTs at the very beginning of the year. Is that right?
I hope so.
Yeah, that's
Oh,
one.
it's front-loaded?
I'm
That's
pretty
one of
sure
the-
it's front-loaded.
That's one of the front-loaded expenses,
Exactly.
right?
Okay. I guess just an observation, looks like we ordered some salt, and it got to be pretty expensive since we've encumbered $212,000 on page 13.
Sure.
Yeah, we talked about that last time with the
Right.
price.
Yep.
The price last year was $74.17, and this year it was $95.55. And that is for the state bid.
Right.
On page 12, under streets and roads, we have equipment rental during last month was about 31,000, and we have an encumbrance for about 177,000. Is that for picking up leaves,
Leaf
or
pickup.
paving roads, or some combination of the two?
No, that's for leaf pickup.
And the encumbrance?
There was a 20% of increase because of fuel, and there was also extra runs of residents calling in for late pickups. So we had to run some extra runs.
But the encumbrance of 177,000?
The encumbrance is just what they budget that they're going to get paid, but, you know, the inflationary part of it, it won't be the full thing.
And Ingrid and I think that that encumbrance that you see there is going to be about $18,180 less than what we see, and what you'll see in the next report.
I see.
So,
Okay.
Where would we see the cost for the traffic lights? I remember, Mike, you had talked about a lot, we have to change a lot of the bulbs and we can't get the parts, so where would we see that? Because I've noticed there's a light, I
That's
forgot.
towards the end, right?
Is that, where is that? And
Might be on the page.
would it be, I couldn't remember.
Street lighting is on page 16, last item. It may not be mine.
so we ended up getting this under control. They were overbilling us inadvertently. We went back, Tim and I had spoken about it. I went to the president of the UI, and we got an offset on the future bills. So, and actually we got cash at the end of the fiscal year, and now this is back in order again with that line item. We're being billed what we're supposed to be billed at.
Back on page 14, under regional health districts, I'm just wondering why for the last month, it has month-to-date expended of 0. Is there something about the way that the regional health district is funded that,
Looks like we must pay 2 payments. The first payment,
Yeah.
year-to-date's 83.6, it's basically half, right?
right,
Yes.
Yeah, it's a
Twice a year.
biannual payment, so.
so that doesn't include like salaries for individuals that work there? It
No,
does?
no, that doesn't. That
That's our
has-
contribution.
that-
That's a separate thing. This is just our,
No, we don't,
our
we
town's.
don't pay any salaries for that. That's not, we don't pay their salaries.
Oh, okay.
Each city and town makes a contribution.
Contribution to it,
It's
I
dues,
see.
it's
It
dues.
just
Because
happens
it's
to be in
regional.
our date.
Right.
Got it.
Right.
Okay.
I guess I would comment, although I did not do all the math, I made a point of looking at all the gas, oil, diesel, heat, and although I did see 1 or 2 that were over, I was pleasantly surprised. A lot of them are even a little bit less, and I don't remember any of them was particularly egregiously high. I know we worried about
I
that.
think the police department was a little on the high side, but new building.
Ingrid, I guess the last thing from me would be on the last page, page 18. There's a negative entry on the principal bonds and notes of almost $300,000. Do we know what that is?
That I have to look into.
Okay.
I did know that.
All right, maybe.
Now, I think that we'll talk about this tomorrow, but I think that we overestimated what the payments were supposed to be, but we'll check that,
Okay.
so.
All right. Any of the members have other questions, Mike?
Madam Controller, nice pen. Is this an update of the Muni system? I mean,
Yes, we
We're putting
updated.
that on paper here, and I think you've gone through some technology changes from it, is that right? Software
Yes.
changes.
Yes, we have.
And how did that go? How did the conversion go?
It's going well. It's
Yeah.
going well,
Were
yes.
there any rough days? Because I know a guy who works down there who causes nothing but trouble. Donegal or something, or I don't know.
It is difficult. It's difficult, and when we implemented this upgrade, and Ingrid's in the middle of it, with Munis, it's a software package that most municipalities use.
Right.
And most of us were on the original version and had not updated. And the upgrades sometimes require great customer service and training from the Munis people, and there's been some turnover there. And
Right.
that puts us back a couple of steps too. But Ingrid's doing a great job of managing through that with Rich and the finance department.
Okay, you have any problems down there, call me. Okay. On page 6, the reserve accrued benefits, obviously have to do with, the retirements and so forth. Yeah, another $104,000 last month. Is that an amount that's gonna continue, or is that more or less just another,
We had we had 2 additional retirements, and we just can't forecast that because
Right.
there's,
Right, so those accrued benefit expenses, that's the full accounting for those 2 people. There's no stretching of that throughout the year, is that right?
right.
Okay, yeah, well, that line will be over by 100%. They're over on 214,000, but yes, I know that that's quite unpredictable. Did we already talk about the equipment rental there on streets and roads? Is that?
Yes,
one?
the leaf
That was-
pickup.
That was that, yeah. Okay. And, we seem to cover that negative number on the last page, so that's all I have to know.
Nancy, Nick, Diane, anything else? All right, why don't we move on to the Board of Ed reports? Oh, sorry, special fund, my apologies. Any questions on the special funds report?
I have one quick question. Again, this is just sort of a formatting issue that the last entry, which is fire, there's no balance in the rightmost column. So we have revenue
Yeah,
and
you're right.
expense, both monthly and year-to-date, but there's no balance. And likewise, is the plan to show the general fund amount on a monthly basis? Is that why that's a row there?
No,
I'm not sure why that's
no,
there.
that's,
Yeah.
no.
And lastly,
One
actually-
second, please.
Please.
Ingrid?
Yes, I see
Yeah.
that. I will
But the
fix
general
that.
fund piece too,
Yeah.
on the left there.
Yeah, we're not.
I don't think that-
No, we won't be showing
Okay.
the general.
We're not going to be showing what the
Yeah,
general fund balance
Sorry.
is on a monthly basis. Okay. And the BOE capital improvement, it looks like they have spent about $211,000. Just 2 questions. The security for schools, I think I asked this before. They have an entry of a little over $4,000. I'm just wondering, why wouldn't that be covered by the security bond that we issued for the school system? I believe it was $2 million.
It could be that they're $4,000 over, that might be it, so.
So it might be helpful to have some
Yep.
sense for, whether they've spent that money, because it seemed to me that, that I had asked Patrick about this, and he was using the security money security bond to pay for things like the renovations at the Ridge Road School
Right.
for handicapped access and things like that. So,
Then they received a grant also for security.
and they also received grants, several grants, yes. And the middle school, it looks like 3 bathrooms. This is a relatively new building. Was there a problem with the bathrooms, or?
Yeah, I think it was $9,000 was spent on the 3 bathrooms for
Yeah.
some repairs in there, so that's what happened there.
Repairs, okay. That's a shame. That's it.
Okay.
Yeah, by the way, on that, on the formatting question there, the top 4 items, library, recreation, police, and fire, those are all special funds. And the MERS in a special account, and the Board of Ed cap improvement savings account is also a separate fund. The fire line is actually taken from at least the income part of the budget, but I think maybe the expenses are on that line are also associated with line item in the expense budget. So that is more associated with the general budget than any of the items above it. So that may be why the general fund label is included there. Because the year-to-date revenue under fire is in the income budget. Forever. And that is under fire fees.
All right, thank you, Mike. Why don't we go on to the board of
Well, one comment on their reports, like they don't carry the categories on some of their reports. But my main question is, I read his, the November memorandum, so this reimbursable wages, although this is technically over budget, since there was no budget for this item, it has popped up. So, and this has to do with the daycare. So what I don't understand, the daycare has been there for a long time, so I'm a little confused as to what this is and why it's showing up now. I mean, it's over budget, but it's not clear to me. Maybe we could
I
ask.
assumed that these wages were within another line item, Diane, when I read that, and that he was creating this just to highlight the fact that they are over budget, but I can't say I'm 100% certain.
We'll get an answer on that.
Yeah, can we
We'll get an answer.
That,
I have 2 comments on the Board of Ed, and again, this is kind of by virtue of the fact that we didn't meet last month. In August, in Howard's Board of Education memorandum, he reported a surplus of $75,915. And then at the November 15th Board of Education meeting, he reported a $450,000 surplus. And again, he stated very clearly that that included those transfers of $640,000 as expenses to medical and capital. So I'd be more than happy to ask this question directly of Howard, but it would be really helpful to have some understanding as to why there's this pretty substantial discrepancy between what he was stating back in August, when the books really should be closed, and what he was stating in November, just after he submitted his closed books to the state.
Ingrid, you take a note on that? We'll get an answer, okay, so.
So maybe it could be, just so Ingrid understands, so you're trying to ask why the discrepancy, or what?
75,000 versus 450,000. That's a pretty big discrepancy.
75 was in August.
75 was in August, again, for fiscal year 21-22. And then at the November Board of Ed meeting, which I watched online, I saw that he stated that he had already submitted all of his paperwork to the state, and was reflecting a $450,000 surplus. So, and again,
All right.
She'll call Howard tomorrow, okay?
Yes, I'll talk to him.
Mike? Mike? Okay.
and they're continuing to provide free lunch through the end of December, is that correct?
It was in his letter.
Yep.
Through the end of
You mentioned in his letter.
Yeah. Mhm.
All right, I'll take a motion on the reports.
Make that motion.
Anyone like to second?
Second.
All in favor?
All right.
Aye.
Thank you. Okay. Next on the agenda is the appointment of one member to the Open Space Advisory Committee. This is something we do annually. I received a letter back in November reminding the chairman of various committees, including P&Z, Park and Rec, Conservation, Inland Wetlands, the Board of Finance, and the North Haven Land Trust, that each of those groups and/or committees are required to appoint one member who will serve for 1 year on the Open Space Advisory Committee. The outgoing member is Mr. Jim Leonis. Nancy Barrett has expressed interest in taking this slot, and I'd be happy to nominate her to take this slot for next year.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right, I'll second that.
Any discussion? All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Aye. Thank you, Nancy.
Thank you very much.
And then, the last item for public comment is the fund balance discussion, which Mike is going to lead.
All right, so what I want us to contemplate is, after going through this for the last 3 years with the rating agencies, we need to amend our 8% policy. And we need to do the amendment. And it's my view that we should amend it to say that it should be between 8 and 12%. But I think what we'd have to do is, in the amendment, put targets going from 8 to 9, 9 to 10, 10 to 11, and 11 to 12 over perhaps a 5-year period. This will allow me to show the rating agencies that we have a goal to work towards. This does not mean that we have to present how we're going to do it. I just need the policy amended so I can eliminate that red flag from one of the 2 red flags we have. As everyone knows, it was a long and arduous call that I had with the rating agencies. I answered every one of their questions, and we got re-rated AAA. It's these 2 flags. So I'm suggesting that we come up with an amendment on what we already memorialized years ago, which is the 8% policy.
Did we ever formalize the policy in terms of a vote or anything in writing?
Yeah, we've done that in the Board of Finance here, yes. We have that.
It was a policy paper?
It's like on paper. I don't remember that.
I think it was just
I mean, I understand it was an informal policy,
Right.
but I didn't realize it was put into some sort of motion or where we voted on that policy.
well,
So I think we're creating policy now. Is that what we're doing?
well, you know, because it was reflected in the minutes years ago that we agreed to an 8%
Yeah.
policy, so I'd like to amend that.
Oh, it's been the benchmark
So,
up to now.
so we would amend it and then redo a document or do a new document.
For town planning and financial reporting purposes, I have no argument in trying to create this policy
Okay.
and these thresholds and targets.
So what I'll do for this board is I'll come up with a draft at the next meeting, Tim, okay? And then we'll look at it, and we'll agree
Could
or
I ask
disagree.
just a couple of quick questions? I know that there have been a few other towns who have actually posted their report from their, and of course, there are a variety of different rating agencies, but I was wondering if you might be able to share with the board specifically the feedback from the rating agency, just so that we could, have a good sense for their language, and what they specifically stated. I know you're summarizing it,
Right.
but as the red flags. Because again, the impression that I'm getting is that it's basically been the same feedback for the last 5 years. Is that accurate?
Well, I'd say the last 3 years.
Okay.
Yep.
So the last 3 years, they've said, compared to other towns, you do not have the same level of reserves in your general fund, and other towns have had changes in their mill rate. Is that on a relative basis?
They don't-
And that the other things that we've done very, very well, to your credit, compensated for those.
That's kind of a summary, yes.
Right.
Yes.
So I guess the question that's before us is, so what's different? If you've got the exact same feedback for 3 years in a row, why all of a sudden is this a cautionary tale that is prompting a change in policy?
So
Well, I
that,
think
yeah, Tim.
I certainly want to hear Mike's answer, but I guess my reaction would be, they're weighing you based on various factors, and if some of the other factors weaken,
That's exactly right.
that there's a potential downgrade because they
Right.
think our fund balance is low.
Yeah, that's exactly it. You know, let's say down the road, there's a change in this administration, and let's say the economic development crashes. Well, we better ensure that the 2 red flags they've already told us about are shored up, because it's an ebb and flow of areas that they rate us on. So, as you said, we score high in categories: economic development, management, leadership. They like that. Consistency, they like that. They don't like when towns have changeovers every year. That adversely affects the rating agencies or their rating. So to try to answer your question more specifically, it's my goal to shore up the 2 red flags, because something on the other side could change. So they're telling us the 2 red flags.
So I think we've weathered a pretty rough period of at least 2 years in terms of big hits to economic development. It seems like things are definitely on the upward trajectory. And one would hope that economic development would also lead to an expansion of the grand list, and the expansion of the grand list would compensate for any need to increase the mill rate, right? Isn't that?
Well,
So it's
yes,
just one leg,
that's
economic
different.
development is just one leg of
Just
how to
one
measure
leg.
it, right?
Yeah, tax collections.
Just like management of the town and fund balance and pension liabilities, these are all just some of the factors that they look at, right? Your debt levels. So, it may, they may look at the economic development going on in town and say that's great, right? But I
Right.
guess back to my point anyways, is if economic development stagnates, or perhaps our pension liabilities increase, they may say, you know what? You got a weak fund balance, you've got higher pension liabilities, you've got slower economic development, we think that's a downgrade.
Right, but as I just pointed out, we went through this period of 2 years in which we managed to endure subpar economic development without a mill rate increase and without changing our fund balance policy. So I guess that's what I'm still kind of wrestling with. It seems like we have weathered the storm, if you will, and come out as a result of all of the factors you just mentioned. We came out pretty well, and so I guess the question is, if we are very well managed, why exactly do we need more reserves, and why the second point is also the potential for an increase in the mill rate, unless we're also saying that we're facing a period in which we may not have these enormous reserves of funds from the federal government that we have received in the last few years, both the town and the Board of Education, in which case then we might need to be in a different circumstance in terms of both our reserves and the mill rate.
For my understanding, just a quick question, are you suggesting that we don't amend from 8% to another? And just keep it
I'm just trying to
8%?
understand what, all of a sudden, we've had the exact same feedback for 3 years in a row, and all of a sudden, at this point, there's this sudden, we have to change things. So I'm just
Well,
trying to get a sense for why.
So, the answer is this, okay? They've said consistently for 3 years, they've outlined at least 2 red flags. So to continue to ignore what they're saying is not a good thing. So there's a variety of factors: leadership, management, economic development. And on this last call, I showed them 30 slides of projects that I'm currently working on that are going to come to fruition here. They've never seen anything like that with any municipality that they have done across the country.
Fantastic, no.
But when
great.
they keep telling you that, your fund balance, you've got to get it higher, we're concerned if the economy crashes, if there's a cybersecurity attack, which I had to cover that aspect in the rating call also.
Of course.
They're giving me two red flags that that they see have been problems for other municipalities across the country. So why would I not try to shore up the two red flags that they've talked to me about the last 3 years? That's what it's about. It's shoring up the red flags.
Sure.
And my feeling is that if I can get at least one of the red flags shored up, the fund balance, then I can get through the next series of rating agency calls.
Okay.
So that's why I'm responding to what they're telling me.
I fully appreciate you being very responsive to the feedback that you've received. I'm just trying to understand
Okay.
why, there's a sudden change now as opposed to, 2 years ago.
I hope
But
I
I appreciate it.
understand
And also, so your plan is only to address one of the two red flags?
Yeah, because we have to go through the workshop sessions. We don't know what we're going to see starting in January and February, so.
Right.
This
And as
addresses-
part of your draft, I'm sorry, will you also put together some suggestions for how we might
No,
get from 8 to 10%?
I won't need to do that for them, as long as we have the
No,
policy.
for us.
No, I think that's something that, I guess I could share, but that's going to be my responsibility to figure that out, so.
Again, I think we all have ideas, it's always worth having kind of a roundtable discussion, and you could get the ball rolling
Okay.
with your thoughts. We'd appreciate it.
All right, very good then, very good.
Thank you. Any final questions or comments on the fund balance discussion?
Tim? No, I don't have a question on that. I had a question or two on the memorandum of agreement. I know we tabled that, but if you're going to go and reconsider and rewrite things, could I bring up a couple questions now on that, or before the rewriting?
On what we just spoke about, you mean
All I'll
memorandum?
say is, this is just like your arrival dates of the meeting, always a couple minutes late. So please, why change now?
You're talking about the BOE, BOF?
Yeah.
Okay,
Right.
go ahead. Yeah.
Well, the unexpended prior year fund, I thought that account was still maintained by the business director, by the Board of Ed itself. Here it says it will be maintained by the finance director, which I guess, I'm not sure we want to change that to controller or not. But once they had the funds and there were surplus funds, did all of a sudden that the maintenance of that account get thrown back to the town?
Well, they came to us in past years, Ed and I, and they recommended that special ed and self-insured would be where the money would go. And Ed and I agreed on it back then. And that's what Ed was saying, he was a gatekeeper. They had to go to Ed, Ed would bring me into it, and then Ed and I would make the decision.
And once we approve the use, the reuse of those funds, we just release it to the Board of Ed? Okay.
Well, I think.
All right, so I don't need an answer to that.
Okay.
Just reconsider that in the rewrite.
All right.
The rewrite, okay?
Okay.
I had a question about the 3% in aggregate as opposed to the 2% of total appropriation. What is the difference between those two?
It's 2% per year, 3% in aggregate.
They don't want the
Most
balance to
of them
get
get 1%
greater
year.
than 3%.
Yeah.
And the total sum of the fund cannot exceed 3% of their budget.
So in other
So
words,
multiple years, you might put money in multiple years, it might build, not be spent, right? Can't exceed 3%.
so in other words, Mike, you won't have a 5% or
Okay,
10% liability.
it's all right, so it's the accumulation
It's
of
accumulation,
funds,
the aggregate.
right, surplus funds,
Yeah.
right, more than 1 year.
That's right.
Is that, okay, that was my other question, is whether we allow the accumulation of funds, or whether we require them to be spent within a certain time frame or window.
We allow it, but I asked that it be capped at a certain number, we agree on 3%.
Okay.
Yep.
And just to piggyback on that, I guess there's the question as to what happens to both the previous process that we all memorialized 2 years ago and the BOE carryover fund, which we also memorialized 2 years ago. So I think it needs to be stated that this new memorandum of agreement takes the place of the previous process that we agreed to.
I'm not sure that process was discussed, but that process is written down, correct?
Right.
We all voted on it in August of 2020 and created the BOE carryover fund.
All right, we'll take a look at it. We'll take a look at it.
Yeah, okay. So this memorandum replaces any prior agreement that may have occurred between.
Yes.
Okay. All right, good. And thank you for sending out the example of the memorandum that other towns have instituted. I'm happy that we took a slightly more simplistic approach, although there may be a couple points that were missing, so very good. We're happy with the direction this is going. Thank you, that's all.
Thank you, Mike. I believe we've now at the point of the meeting where we're ready for public comment.
Hi, Jenny Caldwell, 69 Kimberly Circle. First of all, I just want to say that I think you're doing a great job, because when people are asking you about stuff, you're giving them details, and I sit in these meetings, and sometimes we weren't getting the details, so thank you. Two quick questions. The rating agencies and the calls, is that, can you explain a little bit about who the rating agencies are, and is there, is it like an oral thing, you know, where it's calls, or are there some kind of written report, or how that sort of works?
In years past, they would come in to see me, and I'd drive them around town on the economic development. The rating agency is S&P 500. This past year was a Zoom call, and we have an outline of what they're going to be asking for. We prepare the data, and then it's Mike Frieda answering all the questions.
Okay.
That's how it goes.
So it's not like you get like an audit report or something like that? No.
They give you the ratings. So.
Okay.
Well, they do.
Yeah, yeah.
If you have a subscription to S&P, they often do publish their most recent ratings or their reaffirmations. Even if you don't have a subscription, you can go on to S&P or Moody's and at least get the most recent rating. You might get a couple lines as to how they determine the rating, but they do on their websites publish the rating. Generally only when there's a movement, and sometimes a reaffirmation.
Okay. And then one other just quick question. I know you guys have been talking about the special ed carryover funds, and you had mentioned Amity and the issues in Amity. And when I was looking at that seemed to be the statute they talked about was 10-51, I believe, and that seemed to relate to budgets for regional districts versus what you guys have been talking about, which was a different statute. So I just want to be clear on, you know, is the issue that Amity's having really relate to what you guys have been discussing for the last couple of months, or are they two separate things? And it wasn't clear to me.
They're two separate things that could potentially intersect with each other. That's why I was saying what I said tonight. And it's a very hot topic right now. And we've gotten, down through the years here, we have established an outstanding relationship with the Board of Education. They provided us in the early years more information than any other city and town has gotten from the boards of ed. Now, you were on the Board of Ed.
I was
so
on
you
the
know
board
that.
for 6 years,
Right.
yeah.
Whether it was Sarah when I first took office, Bob Cronin, and now Patrick Stirk. We have an outstanding relationship with the superintendents. And we've now drilled it down, even when Ed was here, God rest his soul. We had a great relationship in the finance directors, Ed and Howard, Ed and Christine prior to. Ingrid now is building that relationship. So at some point in time, this subject is going to have to end.
Yeah, I'm just trying to figure out whether that, wasn't questioning any of that in terms of, you know, the dynamics between the board and the Board of Finance and the Board of Ed. I just was curious about the statute, because what I read seemed to be somewhat different than what you guys are talking here, so I just wanted to get some
There's a
clarification.
distinction, I agree. There's
Okay.
definitely a distinction,
Okay.
yes.
All right, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Jenny. Thank you, Shelley.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman.
Good evening.
Sally Buemi, 5 Blossom Drive. I have one comment about the fund balance. And because we are at the doorstep of our budget formulation process, I think my comment is timely. We've been talking about this policy modification with the 8 to 12%. I think we should tell the folks, I mean, we all know in this room what that means, but let's call it 8%, that was our policy for a long time. That's 8% of our annual budget.
8% of our expenditures.
Of the expenditure
Yes.
budget. Okay. Which is currently 116 million.
Right.
So if you really want to increase or make your fund balance healthier, I mean, the higher your expenditure budget, the higher that balance has to be,
That's
to be
right.
8% of it. It's like running up, we've talked about this before in other regards, Michael, running up the down escalator.
That's right.
So I think, yeah, and there's lots of factors. There's the mill rate, there's economic development. I think it's a little confusing that the rating agency loves economic development. What's the goal of economic development? The goal is to increase your incremental revenue so that you don't have to increase the mill rate. So they love the economic development, but they complain you're not increasing the mill rate. But that's frustrating. But so I know there's a lot of components here, but if you really want to help nudge that percentage up, let's stop increasing our budget by 5 million, 6 million every year. Let's sharpen and resharpen our pencils, ladies and gentlemen, and get a budget that will keep this fund balance percentage in mind. And that's what I really wanted to say.
Okay.
I remember when the budget cracked 100 million, and I thought, wow, this happened a few years sooner than I thought. Back when it was in the low 90s, I thought, another few years. And like that, it was at 100 million. Then it was 107, then it was 111. And now, 2 years later, it's 116. At some point, the spending has to slow down, or else that fund balance will never catch up. So let's keep that factor. There's many factors, I agree. There's a lot of components to keeping our rating agencies happy. But one of them is tightening our spending belt, and now is the time to do it as we start our workshops next month. Thank you.
Thank you, Sal.
Okay.
Mr. Piper, you're our lone other guest. Any comments this evening?
Be glad to make one quick comment.
I agree with you, the heat should increase in the room.
My feet are cold. But thank you. I think it's very important on the memorandum of agreement that, I think as you've had a very good discussion tonight on it being clear. And the one thing I think that we didn't go back, and I think I mentioned it last time I spoke. By the way, Bill Piper, 28 Bassett Road, and I'm the other select person on the Board of Selectmen, along with Sally. Is that I think they'll continue to be, if you look at paragraph 2, a monthly report. So even if we don't know exactly, or they estimate at the beginning of the process what will go into different areas, and that may change over time, they will give us a report, or we'll give the Board of Finance a report monthly. So, I think I think Nancy correctly pointed out maybe there were some tense issues, but I think it may have to do with the fact that they will tell us what they're going to spend it on a projected basis, even though it's been approved by the Board of Education, and it hasn't been spent yet, but they know they're going to spend it on that. So I think that's where the projected comes in. So I think it's a very good conversation, and this is, we've had quite a few meetings on this, and I think the right thing to do is to actually make it understandable where everybody on the Board of Ed and the Board of Finance, are in agreement that everybody's responsibility is clear. So I just thought, it made sense to, I think, as was determined tonight, to table it so that it is, everybody's very clear about what everybody will do. So thank you very much, and my best wishes to everybody for the holidays.
Thank you. All right. With that, I wish everyone happy holidays. Sorry,
I
think Nancy's got
have a
something.
couple of questions
Yeah.
for Mr. Frida before we close. I was just wondering, have the town and BOE budgets for 2021 and 22 been finalized, and when will we meet with the auditor?
Say that again, I'm sorry. You're talking
Have we
about-
closed the books on the
No.
last fiscal year?
No, we'll be meeting with the auditor. I think we've got an extension through January, I think, so.
Okay, so we will be meeting with him March or something like that, you think?
Oh, well, as far as the auditor coming to the Board of Finance,
That's-
that'll still be March, okay?
Oh, okay.
We are trying to close the books with the auditors, Ingrid and myself and the Finance Department.
Sure.
So, yeah, that'll still be on track for the auditor to meet with us on that
I think in the
March.
past, we've met in December or January. That's why I'm, obviously, the
Not
last.
No.
December, because
No.
by statute, the report's not even due till the 31st. We just heard Mike say we
Right.
got an extension, so I
Okay.
don't think it's been that early.
So
So-
in March, we'll probably see the CAFR report, and
Okay.
then the summarization of material weaknesses, which we haven't had any on the town side, but
Okay.
that's March.
And could I get an update on the application for the $7 million grant, the matching grant, 3.5 and 3.5 million for the Public Works?
Public Works, so I'm not sure.
I think Lynn Sadowski had talked about this, that she
Oh, that-
was
yeah, that has
trying
not-
to get matching for the $3.5 million athletic bond, if you will, that.
Yeah, I don't think we've got an answer on that yet.
Okay, I thought it was supposed to be this
right.
month, so I
And
wondered if we had.
However, there was an announcement, and maybe we didn't get it, but we'll check that, okay?
Okay.
So,
And just one last comment, and again, this is since we all work in corporate America, I just like, in preparation for the upcoming budget development workshops and the drafting process, I'd like to see some of what we're all very familiar with as standard business practices employed into this process. So rather than just having department heads come before us and present their expenditure wish list, I need X number of people, trucks, et cetera. I'd like to see some evidence of what Mr. Frida likes to do, which is much more strategic planning. And I'd love to be able to see individual department heads come before us and describe a project or a specific program, how that leads to better service for our town, and most importantly, to have metrics in place to quantify whether they actually are able to achieve that end goal. Because I think that in the business world is ultimately how you determine whether a program is successful or not. And I think that would be something that both at the public hearing and at the town meeting, we can talk about specific programs or projects and how they will better our town, as opposed to just kind of making sweeping statements about investing in this department or that department. So I'm putting this out there as a suggestion, certainly for your consideration, but I think that might lead to a different kind of workshop and a different kind of discussion process with the department heads.
So as an example, let's, with streets and roads. So if they request a new sanitation truck that has the arm on it, okay? I'm sure, and I would certainly ask them to do it, to explain the benefit of that $700,000 investment. And I can tell you what the benefit is. The benefit is it's more efficient at the curb level, and it also eliminates potential workman's compensation issues. So
Absolutely.
if that's what you're asking, I think they could do that, yes.
Absolutely. That's just one example.
Right.
Again, the counter to that point is, would we then see a reduction in staffing in that department? But I think there have been many people that have asked me that very question very recently about getting some sort of standardization to garbage pickup. But I would love to be able to see something that is much closer to a strategic plan at the departmental level, not just at the town level.
I think the fire department does a great job at that. They've brought their level of presentations up through Chief Januszewski miles where it used to be, ahead of where it used to be.
To the extent that we can see metrics in place that, looking back at data, say, yes, we achieved this goal, and here's the evidence to prove that, I'd love to be able to see that for each and every department. That'd be great. So with that, Mr. Chairman, thank you so much for the extra time.
Thank you.
Okay.
All right, I'll take a motion to adjourn.
Make the motion.
Second, please.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Have a
Thank
nice
you.
holiday.
Happy holidays, everyone.
Thank you.
Happy holidays.
Happy holiday.
Ingrid,
And safe
just one
holidays.
Yes.
The preceding program is brought to you in part through a grant from
Just write down your email address.
the town of North Haven. Watch town meetings or other videos on demand at nhtv.com.